$300 short again this month, my father announced, sliding my bank statement across the kitchen table. That's coming out of your college fund. I sat frozen as he explained how my 5 years of rent payments were simply preparation for the real world, while my younger sister Madison lived entirely expense-free in the bedroom next to mine. The inequality had been painful enough during high school, but now that I was 23 and working full-time while attending graduate classes, watching Madison's carefree existence at age 20 had become unbearable. Little did my parents know that their blatant favoritism was teaching me lessons they never intended. Lessons that would become remarkably valuable when they eventually found themselves desperate for financial help. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first memory I have of the different rules for Madison and me comes from when I was 7 years old. We were at the county fair, and I'd spent my entire $10 allowance carefully over the course of the day, $2 on cotton candy, $3 on the duck, pond game, and $5 held back because Dad had always stressed the importance of saving. When Madison spent her entire allowance in the first hour and began crying for more, I watched in disbelief as Dad reached for his wallet without hesitation. "But you always tell me when my money's gone, it's gone," I said, confusion evident in my voice. Dad barely glanced in my direction. "Madison's younger, Olivia. She's still learning about money." That moment planted a seed that would grow into the defining dynamic of our family. There were rules for me, and there were rules for Madison. And they were never the same. My name is Olivia Chen. I'm 27 years old now, but this story begins 4 years ago when I was 23, had just completed my undergraduate degree in accounting, and had moved back into my parents' suburban home in Westbrook while starting my master's program. Living at home hadn't been my first choice, but with graduate tuition and the cost of living in our metropolitan area, it had seemed like the financially responsible decision. What I hadn't anticipated was that my parents' differential treatment would not only continue into adulthood, but would intensify in ways that fundamentally altered my relationship with them. And ultimately, my entire life path. "We need to discuss expectations now that you're back," my father said during my first week home. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the scene of countless family meetings over the years. My mother sat beside him, her expression carefully neutral as it always was during these conversations. Madison was nowhere to be seen. Dad slid a typed document across the table. "Your mother and I have outlined the terms for you living here during your graduate program." I scanned the paper, my stomach tightening as I read. They expected $600 monthly rent, contribution to utilities, purchasing my own groceries, and adherence to a curfew despite my age. I would also be responsible for specific household chores, including mowing the lawn and cleaning the bathrooms. "This is a lot," I said carefully. "Is Madison on the same arrangement?" The question hung in the air for a moment before my mother answered. "Madison's situation is different. She's still an undergraduate, and she's struggling a bit with her classes. She needs to focus on her studies without additional pressure." "And I don't need to focus on my graduate studies?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. My father's expression hardened slightly. "You've always been more academically gifted. Olivia, you can handle the responsibility. Besides, you're working at that accounting firm now. You can afford this." The accounting firm was a part-time bookkeeping position that paid barely above minimum wage, but I had learned years ago that contradicting my father's pronouncements only made things worse. "What exactly are Madison's responsibilities then?" I pressed, already knowing the answer. "That's between us and your sister," my father replied with finality. "This isn't about comparing arrangements. This is about you becoming a responsible adult." I signed the agreement that day, telling myself it was temporary, just until I finished my graduate degree and found a full-time position. It was the practical choice, even if it felt profoundly unfair. What I didn't realize then was how this arrangement would crystallize into a pattern that would define the next several years of my life, and how it would gradually transform me from a people-pleasing daughter desperate for approval into someone capable of making difficult decisions based on self-respect rather than family obligation. For the first few months, I tried to ignore the disparity. I focused on my classes, worked extra hours at the bookkeeping job, and attempted to see my rent payments as a form of adulting, proof that I was financially responsible in ways my sister wasn't. But the daily reminders made that perspective increasingly difficult to maintain. While I rushed to prepare my own meals before classes, Madison slept in while Mom cooked her breakfast. When I carefully budgeted for textbooks and course materials, Madison casually mentioned that Dad had ordered hers online. As I calculated whether I could afford both gas for my commute and a desperately needed new pair of work shoes, Madison showed off the designer boots our parents had surprised her with, just because. The inequality extended beyond financial matters. Madison had no curfew despite being younger. Her room could remain messy without comment, while I received text messages at work if I'd left a coffee mug in the sink. She could have friends over any time, while I was expected to provide advance notice and obtain permission. "It's because they trust you more," my friend Zoe suggested when I confided in her over coffee one evening. "They know you're responsible, so they hold you to a higher standard." "That's what Dad always says," I replied, stirring my drink absently. But being trusted shouldn't feel like a punishment. Zoe, who had grown up as an only child, couldn't fully understand the complex dynamics of sibling favoritism, but she tried. "Have you talked to them about how you feel? Really talked, not just made comments?" I had tried, of course, multiple times over the years. The conversations always ended the same way, with my parents insisting they treated us equally based on our different needs, and suggesting that my perception was the problem. The gaslighting had become so routine that I'd almost started to believe them. Almost. One evening, 6 months into this arrangement, I arrived home after a grueling day of classes, followed by a shift at work to find Madison and her friends lounging. In the living room, pizza boxes and soda cans scattered across the coffee table. The house smelled of nail polish and the expensive scented candles my mother only allowed to be burned on special occasions. "Hey sis," Madison called out cheerfully. "We're having a study group. There's no pizza left, but there's probably something in the fridge." I nodded tiredly and headed to the kitchen, where I found my mother preparing a plate of brownies. "These are for Madison's friends," she explained as I opened the refrigerator. "They've been working so hard on their group project." I stared at the nearly empty refrigerator, remembering how I'd been too rushed that morning to pack lunch and too broke to buy something on campus. The only items inside were Madison's yogurts, labeled with her name, and some condiments. "I guess I'll go pick something up," I said, calculating whether the $8 in my account would cover even the cheapest fast food meal. My mother glanced up briefly. "Didn't you just get paid yesterday? You really should budget better, Olivia. Your father and I can't keep supporting both of you forever." The irony of her statement, as she prepared homemade brownies for my fully supported sister, was so overwhelming that I couldn't even formulate a response. I simply grabbed my keys and left, driving to Zoe's apartment where she generously shared her leftover pasta without making me feel like a charity case. That night marked a shift in my perspective. As I lay awake in bed, listening to Madison's friends laughing down the hall well past my responsible adult curfew, I stopped trying to rationalize my parents' treatment. I stopped believing that there must be some underlying reason for the disparity that I was simply too self-centered to understand. I stopped accepting that this was normal or fair or character building. I opened the budget spreadsheet on my phone, the one where I meticulously tracked every dollar earned and spent, and added a new savings category labeled Exit. Whatever it took, I needed to find my own place, even if it meant taking on more debt or working additional hours. The following morning, I approached my father as he read the newspaper at the kitchen table, his Saturday ritual for as long as I could remember. "I'd like to discuss the household arrangement," I said, sitting across from him with my own copy of the agreement they'd had me sign. He lowered the paper slightly, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "What about it?" "It's not working for me," I stated simply. "The financial burden is affecting my studies, and the disparity between what's expected from me and what's expected from Madison is concerning." My father set the paper down, his expression a familiar mix of disappointment and dismissal. "We've been through this before, Olivia. You and your sister are different people with different circumstances. We're both adults." "Living in your house," I countered. "The differences in how we're treated go far beyond acknowledging our individual needs." My father's jaw tightened, a warning sign I recognized from countless previous confrontations. "Your sister struggles in ways you don't. You've always been more capable, more independent. That doesn't explain why she lives here completely free while I pay rent and utilities," I persisted. "It doesn't explain why she has no household responsibilities while I'm essentially a tenant who also provides free labor. If you don't like the arrangement, you're free to find your own place," he said, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. "Your mother and I are doing you a favor allowing you to live here during graduate school. Many parents wouldn't even offer that." The familiar mix of frustration and helplessness washed over me. This wasn't a negotiation. It never had been. This was my father establishing the terms under which I was permitted to exist in their space. Terms that had always been fundamentally different from those offered to my sister. "You're right," I said finally, standing up. "I should find my own place. Thank you for making that clear." Something in my tone must have communicated that this time was different, because my father looked up with slight surprise. "Don't be dramatic, Olivia. We're simply preparing you for the real world in ways appropriate to your maturity level." I nodded, no longer interested in arguing. The real world. Right. The real world, as it happened, wasn't particularly welcoming to a graduate student with a part-time job in one of the country's most expensive housing markets. Over the next few weeks, I researched apartments, room shares, and even tiny studio units in less desirable neighborhoods. Everything was astronomically beyond my budget, especially while maintaining my class schedule. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During this search, I received an unexpected call from Walter Green, the owner of the small accounting firm where I worked part-time. Walter was in his 60s, a no-nonsense professional who had built his practice from scratch after leaving a larger firm decades earlier. "Olivia, I need someone to handle the Carson manufacturing account while Patricia is on medical leave," he said without preamble. "It's more hours than you're currently working, but I think you're ready for the responsibility." The Carson account was one of the firm's largest clients, a medium-sized manufacturing company with complex financial needs. I had assisted Patricia with their bookkeeping occasionally, but taking over completely would be a significant professional step. "I'd be happy to help," I replied, trying to sound confident despite my surprise. "When would this start?" "Next week," Walter said. "Come in tomorrow and Patricia will begin the handover. We'll increase your hours to 30 per week and adjust your compensation accordingly." The timing couldn't have been better. While the increased workload would make my academic schedule even more challenging, the additional income might just make independent living possible, especially if I could find roommates to share costs. When I arrived home that evening, I found my parents and Madison in the dining room, the table set with the good china that only appeared on special occasions. "There you are," my mother exclaimed. "We were about to start without you." "What's the occasion?" I asked, setting down my bag. My father beamed at Madison. "Your sister received some excellent news today. She's been accepted into the summer internship program at Westbrook Memorial Hospital." It's highly competitive, Madison added, her excitement palpable. Only 10 students from the nursing program were selected. That's wonderful, I said, sincerely. Despite our complicated relationship, I had never begrudged Madison her achievements. Congratulations. We're having a celebration dinner, my mother explained. I made your sister's favorites. As we ate, my parents continually steered the conversation back to Madison's accomplishment, discussing the prestige of the program and how it would enhance her future career prospects. I listened politely, waiting for an appropriate moment to share my own news. When there was finally a lull in the Madison-focused conversation, I spoke up. I also received some good news today. Walter has asked me to take over the Carson manufacturing account while Patricia is on medical leave. It's a significant responsibility increase and comes with more hours and better pay. There was a brief moment of silence before my father nodded. That's good. The additional income will help you meet your financial obligations. My mother added, just make sure it doesn't affect your studies. Your master's degree should be your priority. And that was it. No celebration, no questions about what the opportunity meant for my career development. No acknowledgement of the vote of confidence it represented from my employer. Just a practical note about how the money would help me pay them what I owed. Madison, perhaps sensing my disappointment, attempted to bridge the gap. That sounds really impressive, Liv. Is it a big company? Before I could answer, my father interrupted. Now, about your internship, Madison. Have they discussed whether it might lead to a position after you graduate? Networking is crucial in the medical field. And just like that, my moment was over. The conversation redirected. To the daughter whose accomplishments were deemed worthy of celebration. Later that night, as I updated my budget spreadsheet with the projected income increase, I received a text from Zoe. Any luck with the apartment search? I hesitated before responding. Maybe. Got more hours at work. Might make it possible if I can find roommates. Zoe's reply came quickly. Alex and Jen are looking for a third person for their place in Riverdale. Not the best neighborhood, but decent building. Want me to connect you? Riverdale was a solid 30-minute commute from both my workplace and campus, but the possibility of escape from my parents' house made the distance seem insignificant. Absolutely. Thank you. 2 weeks later, after meeting with Alex and Jen, both young professionals who worked long hours and seemed respectful of personal space, I signed on to their lease as the third roommate. The rent was still a stretch on my budget, but with careful planning and my increased hours at the accounting firm, it was manageable. When I informed my parents of my decision over dinner, their reactions were telling. My father frowned, clearly displeased about losing the monthly income I provided. My mother expressed concern about the neighborhood and the commute, suggesting the move was impulsive and poorly considered. Madison, surprisingly, was the only one who offered genuine support. I think it's great, she said. You deserve your own space. The day I moved out was revelatory. As I packed my belongings into the used car I'd purchased with my own carefully saved money, I realized how little I actually owned. Years of financial constraint had limited my possessions to necessities, while Madison's room overflowed with clothes, electronics, and decorative items our parents had provided. My father appeared in the doorway as I zipped my final suitcase. You understand that if this doesn't work out, the terms for moving back will be renegotiated, he said, his tone making it clear that any return would come with even stricter conditions. I understand, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. But it will work out. He nodded, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. You've always been stubborn, just like me. It was as close to approval as I was likely to get, and despite everything, some childish part of me still craved that validation. I learned from the best, I said, attempting a smile. As I drove away from the house that had never truly felt like my home, a complex mixture of emotions washed over me. apprehension about the financial tightrope I would now be walking, relief at escaping the daily reminders of my second-class family status, and underneath it all, a lingering sadness that my relationship with my parents had come to this. What I didn't yet realize was that this move, difficult as it was, represented the first step in a journey that would ultimately lead to the most unexpected confrontation with my family's dynamics, one that would force all of us to reckon with years of inequality and unspoken resentments. The apartment in Riverdale was far from luxurious, a 3-bedroom unit in an aging building with unreliable elevators and temperamental plumbing. My room was the smallest, barely fitting a bed and desk, but it was mine. No one monitored my comings and goings, questioned my food choices, or presented me with unexpected financial obligations. For the first time in my adult life, I experienced the freedom to establish my own routines and priorities. I could stay up late working on assignments without receiving disapproving glances. I could invite friends over without seeking permission. I could leave dishes in the sink if I was running late, though I rarely did out of respect for my roommates. The financial strain was significant. Between rent, utilities, groceries, transportation, and tuition payments, my carefully constructed budget left virtually no room for error. I took on additional freelance bookkeeping work, often completing data entry projects late into the night, after finishing my own coursework. I ate simple, inexpensive meals and became an expert at finding free entertainment options. Every 2 weeks, I transferred a small amount to my emergency fund savings account, never more than $50, but the growing balance provided a sense of security I had never experienced under my parents' roof. My mother called weekly, our conversations a careful dance around the underlying tensions. She provided updates about Madison's internship successes and my father's work projects, but rarely asked substantive questions about my own life. When she did inquire about my living situation or financial status, the questions carried an undercurrent of expectation that I would admit to struggling. "Your father mentioned that tuition payments for the next semester are due soon," she said during one such call, 3 months after I'd moved out. "Will you be able to manage that with your rent obligations?" "I've budgeted for it," I replied simply, unwilling to detail the extra hours and careful planning that made it possible. "Well, if you find yourself short, you know you can always move back home," she offered, her tone suggesting this was generous rather than self-interested. "Your room is still available." What she didn't say, but what we both understood, was that available meant available under the previous terms, or worse. My father hadn't forgotten the monthly rent I had previously contributed to their household. "I appreciate that, Mom, but I'm doing fine here," I said, maintaining the polite fiction that her offer was motivated by concern rather than financial consideration. As the months passed, I settled into a rhythm of work, study, and carefully managed independence. My performance at both the accounting firm and in my graduate program improved without the constant emotional drain of navigating my parents' household dynamics. Walter assigned me additional responsibilities beyond the Carson account, clearly pleased with my work, and my professors began suggesting I consider pursuing CPA certification after completing my master's degree. Meanwhile, updates from home followed predictable patterns. Madison's internship led to a part-time position at the hospital while she completed her nursing degree, an achievement my parents celebrated with dinner at an upscale restaurant to which I wasn't invited. My father received a promotion at the investment firm where he'd worked for 2 decades. My mother joined a neighborhood committee dedicated to community beautification. Life continued its forward momentum, with my path increasingly diverging from my family's intertwined existence. Our relationship settled into a distant cordiality, maintained through obligatory holiday gatherings and occasional Sunday dinners that always left me emotionally drained despite their brevity. Then, approximately 11 months after I moved out, everything changed with a single phone call. The air in my tiny bedroom felt electric with possibility as I signed the lease agreement for the apartment in Riverdale, 3 signatures, mine, Alex's and Jen's, transforming me from a financially exploited daughter to an independent adult with equal standing in a shared living arrangement. The rent would consume nearly half my monthly income, but the freedom it promised seemed worth every penny. "Congratulations, Rumi," Alex said, sliding the signed document across the coffee shop table. At 28, he worked as a graphic designer for a local marketing firm and had the easy confidence of someone who had been navigating adult life successfully for years. "We can help you move this weekend if that works." "That would be amazing," I replied, my mind already calculating how many trips it would take to transport my meager belongings in my compact car. "I don't have much furniture, though." "The previous roommate left a bed frame," Jen offered. A quiet software developer who spent most of her time either working or rock climbing, Jen had been initially reserved during our meeting, but had warmed up when we discovered our shared love of true crime podcasts. "It needs a mattress, but the frame is solid. And we've got plenty of kitchen stuff," Alex added. "Just bring your clothes and personal items. We can figure out what else you need once you're settled." Their casual generosity stood in stark contrast to my family's calculated approach to support. There were no written agreements, no enumerated expectations, just the basic assumption that we would each contribute fairly to our shared home. That weekend, as I packed my belongings under my mother's watchful eye, the weight of what I was leaving behind became increasingly apparent. It wasn't just the physical space or the financial arrangement. It was the constant need to justify my existence, to prove my worth through compliance and contribution, while watching Madison receive unconditional support. "I still think this is hasty," my mother said, folding a sweater with unnecessary precision before placing it in my suitcase. "Living with strangers has its own challenges." "They're not strangers anymore," I countered, "and the arrangement is straightforward. We each pay an equal share and respect each other's space." My mother's lips thinned into a familiar expression of disapproval. "Well, when the novelty wears off and you realize how expensive independent living truly is, your father and I will be ready to discuss your return." I didn't bother responding. We both knew any return would come with even stricter conditions. My father had made that abundantly clear. Instead, I focused on packing the books and personal items that represented my academic achievements and individual identity, leaving behind the childhood mementos that tied me to a family dynamic I was increasingly determined to escape. Madison appeared in my doorway as I was zipping my final suitcase, her expression uncharacteristically serious. At 20, she still possessed the casual confidence of someone who had never had to question her place in our family hierarchy. "So, you're really doing this?" she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Looks that way," I replied, keeping my tone light despite the complexity of emotions I felt toward my sister. Madison hadn't created our parents' biased system, but she had certainly benefited from it without ever acknowledging the inequality. "I think it's brave," she said unexpectedly. "Standing up to Dad like this." Her comment caught me off guard. Madison and I had maintained a cordial but distant relationship throughout our lives, both of us subconsciously aware that addressing the inequality directly would threaten the fragile family dynamic. This was the closest she had ever come to acknowledging the disparity in our treatment. "It's not about standing up to anyone," I said carefully. "It's about creating a situation that works better for me." Madison nodded, but her eyes held an understanding that surprised me. "Well, I think it's cool that you're making your own way. I'll miss having you around, though." As I loaded the last of my belongings into my car, my father emerged from his home office, where he had remained conspicuously absent throughout the packing process. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of paternal concern overlaying what I recognized as irritation at the disruption of his financial arrangements. "You understand that if this doesn't work out, the terms for moving back will be renegotiated," he said, his tone making it clear that any return would be on his terms alone. "I understand," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "But it will work out." He nodded, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. You've always been stubborn, just like me. It was as close to approval as I was likely to get, and despite everything, some childish part of me still craved that validation. I learned from the best, I said, attempting a smile. As I drove away from the house that had never truly felt like my home, a complex mixture of emotions washed over me. Apprehension about the financial tightrope I would now be walking, relief at escaping the daily reminders of my second-class family status, and underneath it all, a lingering sadness that my relationship with my parents had come to this. The apartment in Riverdale exceeded my modest expectations. Though the building was older, with creaky elevators and occasionally temperamental plumbing, the unit itself was clean and surprisingly spacious. My bedroom, while the smallest of the three, easily accommodated the second-hand desk I purchased from a graduating student and the bed frame my roommates had promised. "Home sweet home," Alex declared as we assembled my new IKEA mattress that first evening. "We usually do a communal dinner on Sundays, but otherwise we're pretty independent with food. That work for you?" "Perfectly," I replied, already appreciating the straightforward communication about expectations. "I'm usually pretty busy with work and classes, but I'd love to contribute to Sunday dinners." Jen, who was installing a shelf in the corner of my room, smiled. "Alex makes an amazing lasagna, and I do a decent stir-fry. What's your specialty?" The question momentarily stunned me. In my parents' home, cooking had been primarily my mother's domain, with Madison occasionally helping for bonding time, while I was expected to either fend for myself or assist without recognition. "I make really good enchiladas," I finally said, remembering the recipe I'd perfected during late nights when everyone else was asleep and the kitchen was finally mine. "And decent chocolate chip cookies." "Sunday dinner rotation it is then," Alex declared. And just like that, I was integrated into their household rhythm, not as a subordinate or financial contributor, but as an equal partner in creating our shared living experience. The transition to independent living came with inevitable challenges. My carefully constructed budget left virtually no room for error, requiring constant vigilance and occasional sacrifices. I learned to shop strategically, scouring discount grocers and buying in bulk when possible. I mastered the art of meal prepping, converting inexpensive ingredients into a week's worth of lunches and dinners. I discovered free entertainment options, library events, community concerts, hiking trails accessible by public transportation. But alongside these challenges came unexpected freedoms. For the first time in my adult life, I could structure my time without justification or oversight. I could leave dishes in the sink if I was rushing to class, though I rarely did, out of respect for my roommates. I could invite friends over without seeking permission. I could stay up late working on assignments without receiving disapproving glances. Most significantly, I could manage my finances without interference. Each paycheck from the accounting firm went directly into my account, where I allocated funds according to my own priorities. Rent and utilities came first, followed by tuition, payments, groceries, and transportation. Whatever remained, often just $50 or $60s, went into a dedicated savings account labeled emergency fund. The growing balance in that account, modest though it was, provided a sense of security I had never experienced under my parents' roof. This wasn't money designated for tuition or rent. This was a safety net I was building for myself, one small deposit at a time. My responsibilities at work expanded with the Carson manufacturing account. Walter, impressed by my meticulous approach to their complex financial needs, began assigning me additional clients and including me in meetings with the firm's senior accountants. These opportunities allowed me to apply my academic knowledge in practical contexts while building professional relationships that might prove valuable after graduation. "You have good instincts," Walter told me after I identified a discrepancy in one client's quarterly statements that had eluded previous. Have you considered pursuing CPA certification after your master's? I've thought about it, I admitted. But I'm still working out the financial logistics of continuing my education. Walter nodded thoughtfully. The firm sometimes sponsors promising employees through their certification process, something to consider when you're closer to graduation. His casual mention of potential sponsorship represented more than financial assistance. It was recognition of my professional worth, an acknowledgement that my contributions merited investment. This validation, freely given without expectation of gratitude or compliance, contrasted sharply with my family's transactional approach to support. As the months passed, my academic performance improved without the constant emotional drain of navigating my parents' household dynamics. Freed from the need to justify my existence through exceptional achievement, I found myself genuinely engaging with course material, participating more actively in class discussions, and forming study groups with fellow graduate students. "You seem different this semester," Professor Harrington commented after I presented my analysis of a complex case study. "More confident in your assessments." "I've had some changes in my personal circumstances," I explained vaguely. "It's allowed me to focus more effectively on my studies." "Well, whatever it is, keep it up," she replied. "Your work shows real promise." My mother called weekly, our conversations a careful dance around the underlying tensions. She provided updates about Madison's internship successes and my father's work projects, but rarely asked substantive questions about my own life. When she did inquire about my living situation or financial status, the questions carried an undercurrent of expectation that I would admit to struggling. "Your father mentioned that tuition payments for the next semester are due soon," she said during one such call, 3 months after I'd moved out. "Will you be able to manage that with your rent obligations?" "I've budgeted for it," I replied, simply unwilling to detail the extra hours and careful planning that made it possible. "Well, if you find yourself short, you know you can always move back home," she offered, her tone suggesting this was generous rather than self-interested. "Your room is still available." What she didn't say, but what we both understood, was that available meant available under the previous terms or worse. My father hadn't forgotten the monthly rent I had previously contributed to their household. "I appreciate that, Mom, but I'm doing fine here," I said, maintaining the polite fiction that her offer was motivated by concern rather than financial consideration. Family dinners became monthly obligations that I approached with a mixture of resignation and strategic preparation. I learned to arrive with pre-planned updates about work and school that would satisfy my parents' cursory interest, while revealing nothing about my financial situation or personal development. I redirected uncomfortable questions with practiced ease and limited my visits to precisely 2 hours, long enough to fulfill familial expectations, but short enough to preserve my emotional equilibrium. Madison's achievements continued to receive disproportionate celebration. Her part-time position at the hospital warranted dinner at an upscale restaurant to which I wasn't invited. Her successful completion of a challenging nursing course prompted my father to purchase her a new laptop. Her 21st birthday was marked with a weekend trip to a nearby resort, a stark contrast to the modest family dinner that had acknowledged my milestone birthday the previous year. I observed these disparities with growing detachment, recognizing them as continuing evidence of a pattern that had defined our family dynamic for years. What had once been deeply painful now felt like confirmation that my decision to establish independence had been necessary and correct. 11 months after moving out, I received an unexpected call from my father on a Tuesday evening as I was reviewing notes for a final exam. His name on my phone screen triggered an immediate tension response. Our communications, typically limited to brief exchanges during family dinners or logistical arrangements for holiday gatherings. "Olivia," he began without preamble, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of strain. "I need to discuss something important with you. Can you come to the house tomorrow evening?" The request was unusual enough to trigger concern. "Is everything okay? Is Mom all right? Madison?" Everyone's fine, he replied quickly. It's a financial matter I'd prefer to discuss in person. My mind immediately cataloged possibilities. Another tuition increase, perhaps, or some unexpected academic expense he expected me to cover. I have classes until 6, but I could come by around 7. 7 is fine, he said. Your mother will make dinner. The call ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving me with a nagging uneasiness that persisted through my classes the following day. By the time I arrived at my parents' house, precisely at 7 as promised, my apprehension had evolved into a defensive readiness for whatever financial demand my father intended to make. The scene that greeted me was disconcertingly normal. My mother in the kitchen putting final touches on a meal that smelled like her signature pot roast. Madison setting the dining room table with the everyday dishes rather than the special occasion china. My father emerging from his office with reading glasses perched on his nose and a folder tucked under his arm. Right on time, he noted, as if my punctuality was a revelation rather than a consistent trait. Let's eat first, then we can talk. Dinner proceeded with an awkward formality, my mother and Madison carrying most of the conversation with updates about hospital policies and neighborhood developments. My father remained unusually quiet, contributing only occasional comments while frequently checking his watch. I maintained my standard approach to these gatherings, polite engagement without personal disclosure, while mentally preparing for whatever discussion was to follow. When the meal concluded, my mother stood to clear the table. Madison, help me with the dishes while your father and sister talk. Madison looked momentarily surprised but complied, following our mother into the kitchen with a curious glance. Back at me. My father gestured toward his home office. Shall we? His office had always been a space of authority and judgment, the place where report cards were reviewed, financial lessons were delivered, and household rules were established. As I took the seat across from his imposing desk, I felt a momentary regression to childhood anxiety before my hard-won adult identity reasserted itself. My father settled into his chair and opened the folder he had carried throughout the evening. I'll come straight to the point, Olivia. Your mother and I find ourselves in a temporary financial situation, and I'm hoping you might be in a position to help. The statement was so unexpected that I initially failed to process its meaning. My father, the financial advisor who had lectured me endlessly about fiscal responsibility, who had charged his own daughter rent while supporting her sister completely, who had made me feel like a burden for existing in his home, was asking me for money. What kind of situation? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. He shuffled the papers before him, uncharacteristically hesitant. I made some investment decisions that haven't performed as expected. Simultaneously, we've had some unexpected expenses related to the house and your mother's health. This was new information. Mom is sick? Nothing serious, he clarified quickly. Some persistent symptoms that required specialized testing. Insurance covered most, but the out-of-pocket costs were significant. I nodded, processing this information while noting that health concerns might explain some of my mother's recent fatigue during our phone conversations. I'm sorry to hear that. Is she okay now? The tests were ultimately negative, thankfully. He straightened the papers before him. The issue is that we're facing a perfect storm financially. Investment losses, medical bills, and Madison's tuition payment is due next week. The mention of Madison's tuition triggered a reflexive response. I thought her nursing program was covered by the scholarship she received? Partially covered, my father corrected. And the scholarship disbursement is delayed this semester due to administrative issues at the university. We need to make the payment by Monday to avoid late fees and potential registration problems. I waited, sensing there was more to the story but unwilling to make assumptions. My father cleared his throat. Additionally, the house needs a new roof. The recent storms caused damage that insurance will only partially cover, and the contractors require a 50% deposit to begin work. That sounds challenging, I acknowledged, still unclear about my role in these various financial predicaments. It is, he agreed, then finally arrived at the purpose of our meeting. I'm asking if you might be able to loan us $15,000 to bridge these gaps. It would be a temporary arrangement, of course. I anticipate being able to repay you within 6 months when some other investments mature. The amount struck me like a physical blow. $15,000 was more than I earned in 6 months, more than my entire emergency fund and savings combined. It was a sum so far beyond my financial reality that the request bordered on absurd. Dad, I began carefully, I'm a graduate student working part-time. I don't have access to that kind of money. His expression reflected disappointment rather than surprise. I thought perhaps you might have saved significantly since moving out. Your expenses should be lower without the rent you were paying. Here. The irony of his statement, that my financial situation should be improved by no longer paying him rent, was so stunning that I momentarily lost my capacity for diplomatic response. My rent in Riverdale is higher than what I paid here, I finally managed. And I'm responsible for all my own expenses now, including utilities, food, transportation, and tuition. My father frowned, as if this information contradicted some fundamental assumption. But you've always been so careful with money. Surely you've established some significant savings. I have an emergency fund, I acknowledged, but it's nowhere near $15,000. How much could you manage? He pressed. 10,000? Even 8 would help significantly with the immediate needs. I shook my head, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over me. Except our positions were now reversed. How many times had I sat in this very chair, explaining why I couldn't meet his financial expectations? How many times had he dismissed my financial constraints as poor planning or insufficient effort? My entire savings is just under $4,000, I admitted, and that's designated for emergencies and future tuition payments. My father leaned back in his chair, the familiar expression of disappointment settling onto his features. I see. Well, that's unfortunate. Something about his response, the casual dismissal of my financial reality, the implied judgment about my savings habits, sparked a quiet anger that had been building for years. The memory of my meager graduation dinner while Madison received weekend getaways, of buying my own textbooks while my parents covered all of my sister's expenses, of working through holidays while Madison enjoyed family vacations. All of it crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. Why are you asking me instead of taking out a home equity loan or using a credit line? I asked, already suspecting the answer. My father shifted uncomfortably. My credit situation is complicated at the moment. The investment decisions I mentioned have affected our credit standing temporarily. Translation: his financial mismanagement had damaged their credit to the point that conventional borrowing options were closed. The realization was jarring. My financially conservative father, who had lectured me endlessly about responsible money management, had apparently failed to follow his own advice. What about Madison? I asked. Has she been asked to contribute? My father's expression hardened. Your sister is still a student. She doesn't have income or savings to speak of. Because she's never been expected to have them, I pointed out, unable to contain the observation. She's never paid rent or utilities. She's never had to budget for her own groceries or textbooks. She's never been told that her presence in your home comes with a price tag. The words hung between us, years of unacknowledged inequality finally given voice. My father's jaw tightened in the way it always did when he felt challenged. Your situations are different, he began, falling, back on the familiar refrain. They always have been, I agreed quietly. And they still are. I'm sorry, Dad, but I can't loan you $15,000 that I don't have. I can't even loan you $4,000 that I need for my own financial security. He nodded stiffly, clearly disappointed but unable to argue with the financial reality I'd presented. I understand. I had hoped. but I understand. As I drove back to my apartment that evening, a complex mixture of emotions churned within me. Vindication at the reversal of our financial positions, concern for my mother's health situation, curiosity about the extent of my father's financial mismanagement, and underneath it all, a lingering hurt that even in their moment of need, they had approached me as a potential financial resource rather than a daughter they valued. What I didn't realize then was that this unexpected request represented only the beginning of a financial reckoning that would ultimately force all of us to confront the true cost of years of inequality and unspoken resentments. The lessons I had learned through their uneven treatment were about to become invaluable in ways none of us could have anticipated. The week following my father's surprising request passed in a blur of final exams and extended work hours. I compartmentalized the family situation, focusing instead on the immediate academic deadlines that would determine my graduate school standing. By Friday afternoon, having submitted my last exam and completed the quarterly reconciliation for the Carson account, I finally allowed myself to process the implications of what had transpired in my father's office. The revelation of my parents' financial difficulties created a cognitive dissonance I struggled to resolve. My father, the financial advisor who had lectured me repeatedly about fiscal responsibility, emergency funds, and prudent investment strategies, had apparently mismanaged his own finances to the point of desperation. The man who had scrutinized my every expenditure and charged his own daughter rent while fully supporting her sister now needed financial assistance from the very child he had treated as a revenue stream. The irony wasn't lost on me. That evening, as Alex, Jen, and I shared takeout Chinese food in our apartment's small living room, I found myself contemplating the situation aloud. "My dad asked me for money," I said, the statement still sounding surreal even as I spoke it. "A lot of money." Jen paused with chopsticks halfway to her mouth. "The same dad who made you pay rent while supporting your sister completely?" I nodded, picking at my lo mein. $15,000 to be exact? Alex whistled low. "That's substantial. What's it for?" I shared the explanation my father had provided, the investment losses, my mother's medical expenses, Madison's tuition payment, the roof repair. As I articulated each element, the narrative began to unravel in my mind. The individual components seemed legitimate, but the sudden convergence of all these financial pressures simultaneously struck me as implausible. "So your sister's scholarship is delayed, but they need to pay tuition immediately?" Jen asked, her analytical mind catching the same inconsistency that had nagged at me. "Most universities offer payment plans specifically for situations like that." "And if your dad is a financial advisor," Alex added, "wouldn't he have connections with lenders who could help with a short-term bridge loan? That's literally his profession, right?" Their observations crystallized my own doubts. My father's request hadn't simply been unusual, it had been fundamentally inconsistent with his professional expertise and the financial management principles he had preached throughout my life. "I think there might be more to the story," I admitted, "but I'm not sure I want to dig deeper. It feels intrusive." Jen set down her container, fixing me with her direct gaze. "Olivia, he asked you for $15,000. That crosses the boundary into your financial life. You have every right to understand exactly what you'd be getting involved in." "If you were one of his clients seeking financial advice," Alex pointed out, "he'd tell you never to lend money without understanding the full situation." They were right, of course. The professional distance I had established since moving out had protected me emotionally, but it had also insulated my parents from accountability for their treatment of me. If they were now seeking to reestablish a financial relationship, this time with me as the provider rather than the contributor, I had not just the right but the responsibility to understand the complete picture. The following morning, I called Walter, my mentor at the accounting firm, and asked if I could schedule a consultation during his lunch break. Though surprised by the personal nature of my request, he agreed readily. Walter's office was a reflection of his practical approach to finance: organized, unpretentious, functional. As I explained my father's request and my suspicions about the larger financial situation, he listened attentively, occasionally making notes but offering no immediate judgments. "So you're wondering if there's more to their financial difficulties than they've disclosed," he summarized when I finished. "And you're unsure how to verify their situation without overstepping boundaries." "Exactly," I confirmed. "I don't want to lend money I can't afford to lose, but I also don't want to deny help if they genuinely need it, especially if my mother's health is involved." Walter leaned back in his chair, considering. "There are ways to assess their situation without being intrusive. If they're asking for a loan of this magnitude, it would be entirely reasonable to request documentation of the specific needs: medical bills, tuition statements, contractor estimates for the roof." My father would see that as questioning his integrity, I noted, already imagining his defensive response. "Perhaps," Walter acknowledged, "but it's standard financial practice when lending significant sums. You're not a bank, but you're entitled to the same level of transparency a financial institution would require." He paused, then added carefully, "Has he offered any terms for this loan? Interest rate? Repayment schedule? Collateral?" The question highlighted another peculiarity of my father's request. "No, he just mentioned being able to repay when some investments mature in about 6 months." Walter's expression shifted subtly, the same look he got when reviewing a client's statement that didn't quite add up. "Olivia, I don't want to alarm you, but in my experience, when someone needs a large sum quickly, offers vague repayment terms, and has already exhausted conventional borrowing options, the situation is often more serious than initially presented." His assessment aligned with my own growing concerns. "What would you suggest?" "If you're considering helping at all, I'd recommend starting with a much smaller amount, whatever you can genuinely afford to lose, and making it contingent on receiving full financial disclosure." He opened a drawer and removed a simple form. "This is a personal financial statement template we use with new clients. It provides a comprehensive picture of assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. If your parents complete this, you'd have a clearer understanding of their actual situation." I took the form, grateful for his practical approach. "And if they refuse?" "Then you have your answer about how serious their situation truly is," he replied. "Someone in genuine need who respects your financial boundaries would be willing to provide transparency in exchange for assistance." Armed with Walter's advice and the financial statement template, I spent the weekend carefully reviewing my own finances to determine what level of help I could realistically offer without jeopardizing my own security. The calculation was sobering. After accounting for upcoming tuition payments, rent, and maintaining a minimum emergency fund, I could spare at most $2,000. It was far less than my father had requested, but it represented nearly half my hard-earned savings. On Sunday evening, I called my father to schedule another meeting, suggesting we speak privately before the family dinner planned for the following weekend. His eagerness to accommodate my request, offering to meet me for coffee near my workplace rather than insisting I come to the house, further confirmed my suspicion that the financial situation was more urgent than he had initially portrayed. The cafe we selected was neutral territory, a modest establishment halfway between my office and his. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that offered some privacy for our discussion. My father appeared precisely at the appointed time, his typically immaculate appearance slightly diminished, his shirt collar showing signs of wear, his leather portfolio more scuffed than I remembered. "Thank you for meeting me, Olivia," he began after ordering a simple black coffee. "Have you had a chance to consider my request?" I nodded, placing my notepad on the table between us. "I have, and I'd like to better understand the situation before making any decisions." A flicker of impatience crossed his features before he schooled his expression. I believe I explained the circumstances quite clearly. What additional information do you need? Documentation of the specific expenses, I replied evenly. Medical bills, tuition statements, roof repair estimates, and I'd like to understand your overall financial position. I slid Walter's template across the table. This financial statement would help me assess how best to assist you. My father stared at the form as if I'd placed a venomous snake between us. This is hardly necessary, Olivia. I'm not applying for a bank loan. I'm asking my daughter for help during a temporary setback. You're asking for $15,000, I corrected gently. That's not a small amount for someone in my position. I want to help, but I need to understand what I'm helping with. His jaw tightened, the familiar prelude to paternal displeasure that had intimidated me throughout childhood. I've never questioned your financial decisions or demanded documentation when providing for you. The statement was so fundamentally untrue that I almost laughed. Dad, you reviewed my bank statements monthly when I lived at home. You required receipts for educational expenses before releasing funds from my college account. You calculated my rent based on a percentage of my income from the accounting firm. He shifted uncomfortably, unable to deny these facts. That was different. You were learning financial responsibility. And now I'm practicing it, I replied. I've reviewed my finances carefully. I can offer you $2,000 as a loan, provided I have clarity about your situation and a structured repayment plan. His expression darkened. $2,000 barely addresses the immediate tuition need, let alone the roof deposit or medical bills. It's what I can responsibly offer, I explained. I have my own tuition payments and living expenses to consider. We wouldn't be in this position if you had continued living at home as originally planned, he noted, the implied blame unmistakable. Your rent contribution would have provided additional financial stability for the household. The comment illuminated something I hadn't previously considered, that my departure had not only removed a revenue stream but had possibly destabilized their financial planning in ways I hadn't anticipated. My father's careful management of household income had apparently depended, in part, on my continued financial contribution. My decision to move out was based on the inequitable treatment I experienced, I reminded him. If financial stability depended on my rent payments, perhaps Madison should have been asked to contribute as well. He waved away the suggestion. Your sister's situation is different. Yes, I know. I kept my voice level despite the familiar frustration rising within me. Dad, I'm offering what I can afford to help. If that's insufficient, I understand, but it doesn't change my financial reality. For a long moment, my father was silent, the internal calculation visible in his expression. Finally, he spoke. $2,000 would at least allow us to make a partial tuition payment while we secure other funds. I suppose we should be grateful for whatever assistance you're willing to provide. The begrudging acceptance somehow felt worse than outright rejection. I'll need the completed financial statement and documentation before transferring any funds, I reminded him. And a written agreement regarding repayment terms. This level of formality seems unnecessary between family members, he protested, though with less conviction than before. On the contrary, I replied, thinking of the typed rental agreement he had presented me with upon my return home after college. Clarity protects everyone involved. You taught me that. He gathered the form with poorly concealed reluctance. I'll discuss this with your mother and get back to you. As I watched him leave the cafe, his shoulders slightly more stooped than I remembered, I experienced an unsettling mixture of emotions: concern for my parents' welfare, lingering resentment at their unequal treatment, and beneath it all, a strange new sensation I gradually recognized as empowerment. For the first time in our relationship, I had established and maintained boundaries based on my own financial well-being rather than yielding to his parental authority. 3 days passed without word from my parents, I attended classes, completed assignments, and focused on my professional responsibilities at the accounting firm, all while carrying the unresolved tension of our meeting. When my phone finally displayed my mother's number on Thursday evening, I answered with a mixture of apprehension and resolution. "Olivia," my mother began, her voice carrying the careful neutrality she always adopted during difficult conversations. "Your father mentioned you had some concerns about helping us with our current situation." "Not concerns about helping," I clarified. "Concerns about understanding the full scope of the situation before committing funds I've worked hard to save." A delicate pause followed. "Your father feels your requirements reflect a lack of trust." "They reflect financial prudence," I countered, something Dad has emphasized throughout my life. Another pause, longer this time. "Well, we've been discussing alternatives. Your Aunt Patricia has offered to help with the tuition payment, and we've arranged a payment plan with the roofing contractor." The sudden resolution of supposedly urgent financial needs struck me as suspicious. That's fortunate timing. What about Mom's medical bills? "We're managing those through an arrangement with the hospital," she replied vaguely. "Your offer was generous, but it seems we've found solutions elsewhere." The abrupt withdrawal of their request confirmed what I had suspected. The financial crisis had been either exaggerated or selectively presented to extract maximum assistance from me. When it became clear that my help would come with transparency, requirements, they had quickly located alternative resources that had supposedly been unavailable just days earlier. "I'm glad you found solutions," I said, keeping my tone neutral despite the revelation. "If you do complete the financial statement and provide the documentation I requested, my offer still stands." "That won't be necessary now," my mother assured me quickly. "Will we still see you for dinner this Sunday?" The casual pivot to social obligations, as if the financial discussion had been a minor digression rather than a significant breach of trust, was breathtaking in its presumption. "I have a major project due Monday," I replied. "I'll need to focus on that this weekend." My mother's disappointment was palpable even through the phone. "Madison was looking forward to seeing you. She has news about a potential promotion at the hospital." The implicit expectation that I would set aside my academic commitments to celebrate my sister's achievements that had always received disproportionate recognition, crystallized my decision. "Please congratulate Madison for me. I'll try to make it next month." After ending the call, I sat at my small desk, staring at the financial statement template I had printed for my own records. The exercise of requesting transparency from my parents had revealed more than any completed form could have. It had exposed the fundamental imbalance in our relationship. They had expected unquestioning financial support from me while consistently prioritizing Madison's needs and withholding the same unquestioning support from me throughout my life. The following week brought an unexpected development. While reviewing client files at the accounting firm, I received a text message from Madison, unusual in itself, as our communications typically occurred during family gatherings rather than directly. "Can we meet for coffee? Need to talk about something important." The request was sufficiently out of character to pique my interest. Though Madison and I maintained a cordial relationship, we rarely sought each other's company outside family obligations. I suggested a cafe near my workplace for the following afternoon, and she agreed immediately. When I arrived, Madison was already seated at a corner table, 2 coffees in front of her, one black, my preference, and one elaborately flavored concoction that matched her typically indulgent tastes. The thoughtful gesture caught me by surprise. "Thanks for meeting me," she began as I settled across from her. "I know we don't usually do this." "Is everything okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned by her uncharacteristic seriousness. Madison glanced around before leaning forward slightly. "Not really. Mom and Dad are fighting constantly about money. Dad's been staying at a hotel some nights, and Mom cries when she thinks I'm not around." The revelation stunned me. Our parents had always presented a united front, particularly regarding financial matters. Since when? It's been building for months, she admitted. But it got much worse after Dad asked you for money and you wanted documentation. A defensive response rose within me. That was a reasonable request for $15,000. I know, Madison said, surprising me again. That's part of why I wanted to talk to you. I had no idea they asked you for that much money, or that things were that serious. Her apparent ignorance of our parents' financial situation seemed genuine, raising further questions about the selective information sharing within our family. They didn't discuss their financial difficulties with you? Madison shook her head, absently stirring her elaborate coffee. They never talk money with me. You know that. Indeed, I did. While I had been subjected to constant financial scrutiny and educational discussions about budgeting and responsible spending, Madison had been sheltered from such concerns, a disparity that had defined our different experiences growing up. The thing is, Madison continued, looking uncomfortable, after their fight last night, I overheard Mom on the phone with Aunt Patricia. She mentioned something about Dad's gambling problem resurfacing. The information struck like a physical blow. Gambling problem? Dad? Madison nodded solemnly. Apparently he had issues years ago, before we were born. Mom thought it was under control, but she told Aunt Patricia he's been hiding significant losses for at least a year. This revelation recontextualized my father's request entirely. The supposed investment losses, the urgency, the reluctance to provide documentation, all aligned with the behavior patterns of someone concealing a gambling addiction rather than experiencing temporary financial setbacks. Does this surprise you? Madison asked, studying my expression. You always seem to understand Dad's financial stuff better than me. He never mentioned anything about gambling, I replied, still processing the implications. He's always been so critical of get-rich-quick schemes and risky financial behavior. Classic case of do as I say, not as I do, I guess, Madison offered with a sad smile. Look, there's something else you should know. She hesitated, then continued. The tuition payment they mentioned? It was already covered by my scholarship. That came through weeks ago. The confirmation of my suspicions regarding their manufactured crisis should have felt validating. Instead, it filled me with a complicated sadness. Why would they lie about that? Madison looked genuinely regretful. I think Dad needed money quickly to cover losses before Mom discovered the extent of the problem. When you asked for documentation, it would have exposed the lie. We sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating the fractured foundation of our family dynamics. Finally, Madison spoke again, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Olivia, I owe you an apology. I've known for years that Mom and Dad treated us differently, especially with money. I didn't say anything because, well, it benefited me. The acknowledgement I had craved for years finally arrived, but in circumstances I could never have anticipated. Why are you telling me this now? Madison's eyes reflected genuine remorse. Because watching them try to exploit your financial responsibility when they never fostered mine made me realize how unfair it's all been. You've been paying your own way since high school while I've coasted on their support without question. The validation of my experience, from the very person who had benefited most from the inequality, released something tightly wound within me. I never resented you for it, I said truthfully. The disparity was their choice, not yours. But I accepted it, she countered. And sometimes I played into it, knowing they wouldn't hold me to the same standards they set for you. She reached across the table, an unprecedented gesture of connection between us. I'm trying to change that. I got a second job at the hospital, coffee shop to start building my own savings. I want to be financially independent like you are. The revelation that my sister, who had been portrayed throughout our lives as less capable, less responsible, less able to manage independence, was actively seeking the self-sufficiency I had been forced to develop, created a strange new alignment between us. For the first time, I saw Madison not as the favored child or the competitive sibling, but as someone navigating her own relationship with our parents' dysfunctional dynamics. Financial independence isn't easy, I warned her, especially when you've never had to budget or manage your own expenses before. I know, she acknowledged. That's actually the other reason I wanted to meet. I was hoping. Maybe you could help me learn? You've always been so good with money management. The request represented a fundamental shift in our sisterly dynamic. Madison, looking to me for guidance rather than competing for parental approval. It offered a path forward based on mutual respect rather than resentment. An opportunity to transform the inequality that had defined our relationship into a connection that might transcend our parents' flawed approach. I'd be happy to help, I offered, realizing I genuinely meant it. We could start with creating a basic budget based on your income and essential expenses. Madison's relief was palpable. Thank you. And Olivia? I want you to know I'm not taking their side in this. What they did, asking you for money under false pretenses, was wrong, especially after making you pay rent all those years while I lived free. Her acknowledgement of the injustice I had experienced felt like the closing of a long open wound. What are you going to do about what you overheard? I asked, wondering if Madison's newfound clarity extended to challenging our parents directly. She sighed, suddenly looking much older than her 21 years. I don't know yet. Mom made Aunt Patricia promise not to tell anyone about Dad's gambling. She's still trying to protect him, and by extension, protect me from knowing about it. You could let them know you're aware of the situation, I suggested. It might prompt more honest communication. Madison nodded slowly. Maybe. Or it might make Mom retreat further into denial. She looked at me directly. What would you do? The question represented another shift in our relationship, Madison valuing my perspective rather than dismissing it in favor of our parents' guidance. I would establish clear boundaries, I said after considering. Make it known that you're aware of the situation, but that you won't be drawn into financial entanglements without complete transparency. Boundaries, Madison repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar concept. That's something I've never been good at establishing. You never needed to, I pointed out. Boundaries become necessary when others don't respect your limits naturally. As our conversation continued, mapping out strategies for Madison's financial independence and discussing how to navigate our parents' deteriorating situation, I experienced an unexpected sentiment, gratitude for the challenges that had forced me to develop self-reliance. My parents' unequal treatment, while painful, had equipped me with skills and resilience my sister was only now beginning to cultivate. The following Sunday, rather than attending the family dinner I had declined, Madison and I met at my apartment. Seated at the small kitchen table with budget worksheets and financial planning resources spread before us, we began the process of transforming our relationship from one defined by parental favoritism to one built on mutual support and shared wisdom. As I guided Madison through the basics of budgeting, explaining concepts our father had drilled into me while sheltering her from financial reality, I realized that the true revenge for years of inequality wasn't withholding help when my parents needed it. It was breaking the cycle of financial dependence they had created and helping my sister achieve the self-sufficiency they had never expected her to develop. The stolen glances between my parents at future family gatherings when they witnessed our newfound solidarity would deliver a message more powerful than any verbal confrontation. Their unequal treatment had not succeeded in dividing us permanently. Instead, it had ultimately forged a stronger bond between sisters who now recognized that true family support was neither transactional nor conditional, but built on honesty, respect, and mutual growth. The revelation about my father's gambling, Problem lingered in my mind for weeks after my coffee meeting with Madison. This new context reframed not just his recent financial request, but countless interactions throughout my childhood. The obsessive monitoring of my spending, the harsh judgment of my financial choices, the rigid requirements for documenting every expense. Classic projection, as my psychology professor might say, criticizing in others what you most fear in yourself. April brought the completion of my second-to-last semester of graduate school, marked by stellar grades and a commendation from Professor Harrington on my final project analyzing corporate tax strategies. My professional life was likewise flourishing. Walter had officially promoted me to junior accountant with a modest but meaningful salary increase, and the Carson Manufacturing executives had specifically requested my continued oversight of their accounts. They were impressed by your quarterly presentation, Walter told me as we reviewed my expanding client portfolio. Particularly your attention to detail in identifying potential tax liability reductions. That's not something most junior staff would catch. The validation of my professional capabilities contrasted sharply with my family's persistent underestimation of my potential. While Madison had been groomed for success through constant encouragement and support, I had developed my skills despite the implicit message that I would always need to work harder to achieve the same recognition. My relationship with Madison herself had undergone a surprising transformation. Following our initial financial counseling session, she had embraced the budgeting strategies I recommended with unexpected enthusiasm. Weekly text messages detailing her spending patterns and savings milestones replaced our previous perfunctory communications, creating a bridge of shared experience that gradually extended beyond financial matters. I got the weekend supervisor position at the hospital coffee shop, she announced during one of our now regular Sunday afternoon calls. It's an extra $3 per hour plus management experience for my resume. That's fantastic, I replied, genuinely pleased by her initiative. How are you planning to allocate the additional income? 70% to my independence fund, 20% to current expenses, 10% to discretionary spending, she recited promptly, applying the formula we had developed together. The independence fund just passed $5,000. Her progress toward financial self-sufficiency represented more than monetary accumulation. It reflected a fundamental shift in her understanding of her own capabilities. The sister, who had been perpetually characterized as needing support, was proving remarkably adept at managing her resources when given the opportunity and guidance to do so. Our parents, meanwhile, maintained a careful distance following their withdrawn request for financial assistance. My mother's weekly calls continued, but focused exclusively on superficial updates and gentle inquiries about my well-being. My father's communications were limited to brief interactions during the monthly family dinners I still attended out of a complex mixture of obligation and curiosity about their evolving situation. During these gatherings, I observed subtle indicators of financial strain that would likely be invisible to anyone without my professional training. The thermostat set lower than usual to reduce heating costs. Name-brand products replaced by generic alternatives in the pantry. My mother's characteristic, elaborate table settings simplified to essentials. Most telling was my father's subdued demeanor, the confident financial authority who had dominated family discussions with market analyses and investment recommendations, now seldom mentioned monetary matters at all. When Madison innocently inquired about college loan interest rates for a friend, he deflected the question with uncharacteristic vagueness, suggesting she research online for current rates. My mother intercepted my observant gaze during one such exchange, her expression acknowledging my awareness while silently requesting discretion. I honored this unspoken appeal, limiting my contributions to neutral topics while mentally cataloging the accumulating evidence of their deteriorating financial circumstances. The situation came to an unexpected head in early May when I received an urgent call from Madison on a Tuesday evening. "Dad's in the hospital," she said without preamble, her voice tight with concern. "Mom found him unconscious in his home office. this morning. The doctors think it was a stress-induced cardiac event. The news struck with physical force, momentarily suspending my breath. Despite our complicated relationship, the thought of my father in medical danger triggered an immediate emotional response. Is he stable? Which hospital? Westbrook Memorial. He's stabilized, but they're running tests. Madison's voice cracked slightly. Olivia, when the paramedics were taking him out, I saw papers scattered across his desk. Past due notices, collection letters. It's worse than we thought. I arrived at the hospital 30 minutes later to find my mother seated in the cardiac unit waiting room, her typically immaculate appearance disheveled from hours of anxious vigilance. Her eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, widened slightly at my appearance. You didn't need to come, she said, the reflexive dismissal of my presence, betraying how deeply ingrained our family dynamics remained. Madison shouldn't have worried you. Of course I came, I replied, settling into the chair beside her. How is he? Stabilized. They're calling it a moderate cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but a warning sign. She twisted her wedding ring nervously, a habit I had rarely observed in her carefully controlled demeanor. The cardiologist mentioned stress as a likely contributing factor. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. Financial stress can have significant physical impacts. My mother's gaze snapped to mine, assessing how much I knew before her shoulders slumped in resignation. Madison told you about the gambling. Some of it, I confirmed, and I've observed enough during dinners to recognize the signs of financial distress. For a long moment she was silent, the institutional sounds of the hospital filling the space between us, muted conversations, distant equipment beeps, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weariness that suggested years of carefully maintained appearances crumbling under the weight of reality. It started small, after the Keller investment collapse last year. Robert lost several clients' portfolios, including portions of our retirement funds. He thought he could recover the losses quickly through options trading. She shook her head. Then sports betting. Then online poker. Each loss led to increasingly desperate attempts to recoup. The familiar pattern of gambling addiction emerged. Through her narrative, initial losses triggering escalating risk-taking, secrecy, financial deception, and ultimately, physical collapse under the accumulated stress. My father, the man who had lectured me endlessly about financial prudence, had succumbed to the very impulsivity he had criticized in others. How bad is it? I asked, my professional training automatically calculating potential recovery strategies. My mother's laugh held no humor. Bad enough that we're 3 months behind on the mortgage. Bad enough that he's been using credit card cash advances to pay minimal amounts on other credit cards. Bad enough that he's been hiding mail and intercepting phone calls for months. The scope of the financial disaster exceeded even my cautious estimates. Does his firm know? They will soon, she replied, resignation heavy in her voice. The State Securities Board is investigating client complaints. His professional license will likely be suspended pending review. The implications cascaded. Through my mind, not just personal financial ruin, but professional devastation and potential legal consequences. My father had built his entire identity around financial expertise. The collapse of that foundation threatened more than economic stability. What's your plan? I asked, the question directed more at understanding her thinking than suggesting she should have one. I don't know, she admitted, the rare acknowledgement of uncertainty revealing how thoroughly circumstances had undermined her customary certainty. The immediate medical bills are covered by insurance, thankfully, but the mortgage, the credit cards, Madison's final semester of tuition. She trailed off, overwhelmed by the accumulating obligations. The moment crystallized something I had been gradually recognizing throughout my adult journey toward independence. that financial self-sufficiency represented not just material security, but fundamental freedom to make choices aligned with my values rather than dictated by necessity. "I'd like to speak with Dad when he's able," I said, making a decision I could not have imagined even months earlier. "I think I can help structure a recovery plan." My mother's expression reflected skepticism tinged with desperation. "Your father's pride has contributed to this situation," I finished firmly. "Pride doesn't pay mortgages or negotiate with creditors." Before she could respond, a nurse appeared to inform us that my father was awake and could receive brief visits. My mother rose immediately, then hesitated, glancing between me and the hospital room door. "You go first," I suggested. "I'll wait." 20 minutes later, she emerged, her expression unreadable. "He's asking for you." The hospital room contained none of the authority or intimidation that had characterized my father's home office, his domain of financial judgment and patriarchal control. Instead, I found him diminished against white sheets, monitoring equipment, casting a pale blue glow across features rendered vulnerable by illness and exposure. "Olivia," he acknowledged as I entered, his voice weaker than I had ever heard it. "Your mother told you." I nodded, approaching the bedside with calm professionalism rather than the emotional turmoil churning beneath my composed exterior. "Some of it. I suspect there's more to understand." He closed his eyes briefly, the gesture communicating exhaustion beyond the physical. "I've made a mess of everything." The admission, so contrary to his lifelong posture of infallibility, struck me as more significant than the financial disaster itself. My father had built our family dynamic around his unquestionable authority in all matters, particularly financial ones. This acknowledgement of failure represented the collapse of the framework that had positioned me as perpetually inadequate while elevating Madison as perpetually deserving of support. "Financial recovery is possible," I said, drawing on my professional training rather than familial patterns, "but it requires complete transparency and systematic restructuring of obligations." A ghost of his former skepticism flickered across his features. "You sound like a financial advisor." "I'm an accountant with specific training in financial recovery strategies," I corrected gently, "and I'm offering to help create a sustainable plan for your situation." "Why would you do that?" he asked, the question revealing the transactional worldview that had characterized our relationship. "After everything." The unfinished acknowledgement of our complicated history hung between us, neither fully articulated nor dismissed. I considered my response carefully, wanting neither to minimize the past nor allow it to dictate the future, because addressing the financial crisis properly will benefit everyone involved: you, Mom, Madison, the creditors, and because I have the skills to help. My father studied me with an expression I had rarely seen directed toward me, a mixture of respect and recognition that acknowledged my capabilities without qualification or comparison. "You've become quite competent." From anyone else, the observation might have seemed inadequate. From my father, who had consistently undervalued my achievements while celebrating Madison's more modest accomplishments, it represented a fundamental shift in perception. "I've always been competent," I replied simply. "But yes, my professional training has prepared me for exactly this type of financial recovery planning." Over the next 20 minutes, I outlined a preliminary approach: a complete financial inventory, prioritization of obligations, strategic negotiation with creditors, structured payment plans, and gradual rebuilding of financial stability. My father listened with uncharacteristic receptiveness, asking clarifying questions without defensive justifications. "This won't be easy," I concluded. "It will require significant lifestyle adjustments and absolute commitment to the recovery process." "Including selling the house," he acknowledged, surprising me with his ready acceptance of the most difficult recommendation. "It's too expensive to maintain even without the mortgage problems." "Possibly," I agreed. though there might be alternatives, depending on the complete financial picture. As our discussion concluded, a nurse appeared to indicate visiting hours were ending. I gathered my notes, preparing to leave with a promise to return the following day with more developed recommendations. "Olivia," my father said as I reached the door, his voice stronger than when I had arrived. "Thank you. And I'm sorry. For a great many things." The apology, incomplete yet unprecedented, acknowledged the asymmetry of our relationship without specifically addressing the years of unequal treatment. I accepted it as a beginning rather than a resolution, nodding my acknowledgement before departing. In the hospital corridor, I found Madison and my mother in quiet conversation, both looking up expectantly as I approached. "I've outlined some preliminary recovery strategies," I explained, shifting into the professional role that now felt more natural than the dutiful daughter persona I had maintained for years. "We'll need a complete financial inventory to develop a comprehensive plan." "You're really going to help," Madison observed, the statement neither question nor challenge but simple recognition. "I am," I confirmed, with professional boundaries and clear expectations. My mother's expression reflected the complex recalibration occurring within our family dynamics. The daughter who had been perpetually required to prove her worth now, positioned as the financial authority whose expertise they desperately needed. "We'll cooperate fully," she assured me, the promise carrying implications beyond the immediate financial crisis. "Whatever you recommend." The following weeks established a new pattern of interaction within my family. My father, released from the hospital with strict instructions to minimize stress, provided me with access to financial records he had previously guarded with obsessive privacy. My mother, shedding the carefully maintained illusion of prosperity that had defined her social identity, participated actively in cataloging assets and obligations. Madison, continuing her journey toward financial independence, offered practical assistance while maintaining appropriate boundaries around her own resources. Working primarily from my apartment during evenings and weekends, I developed a comprehensive financial recovery strategy that Walter reviewed for professional thoroughness. The picture that emerged was sobering. Gambling losses exceeding $75,000, credit card debt approaching $43,000, 3 months of mortgage arrears, potential professional liability from questionable client account management, and virtually depleted retirement savings. "It's salvageable," I explained during a family meeting held in my parents' living room rather than my father's office, a symbolic shift in decision-making authority. "But it requires immediate action and complete commitment to the recovery process." The plan I presented included several phases. 1. Immediate triage of critical obligations to prevent foreclosure and essential service disconnections. 2. Negotiated settlements with credit card companies and other unsecured creditors. 3. Structured payment arrangements for secured debt. 4. Gradual rebuilding of financial stability through rigorous budgeting and income maximization. 5. Long-term planning for retirement and potential professional consequences. This initial stabilization period will require approximately $9,000, I concluded, indicating the figure highlighted in my presentation. I can provide $3,000 as an interest-free loan with documented repayment terms. The remainder will need to come from immediate asset liquidation or income redirection. My father, seated on the couch rather than behind his imposing desk, studied the figures with professional concentration despite his diminished physical condition. "You're proposing I liquidate my vintage watch collection?" "Yes," I confirmed without apology. "Non-essential assets should be converted to meet critical obligations. The watches have approximately $4,000 in resale value based on current market listings." He nodded slowly, acceptance replacing the defensiveness that would have characterized his response months earlier. "The golf club membership too, I assume?" "It represents both an immediate liquidation opportunity and the elimination of ongoing monthly expenses," I agreed. approximately $2,000 in returned deposit value, plus $320 monthly savings. My mother, reviewing the household budget section of the plan, traced her finger along expense reductions totaling over $1,500 monthly. This is quite austere. It's sustainable, I corrected gently. The difference between wants and needs becomes very clear during financial recovery. The negotiation turned to implementation details: who would handle specific creditor communications, how documentation would be managed, when progress would be reviewed. Throughout the discussion, I maintained professional detachment while acknowledging the emotional challenges inherent in such significant lifestyle adjustments. One final recommendation, I said as the meeting concluded. Madison should be removed from financial responsibility for this situation. Her tuition for the final semester should be handled through student loans in her name rather than parental contribution. Madison began to protest, her instinctive family loyalty arising despite our recent conversations about healthy boundaries. But I can help. Your financial independence is a separate goal that shouldn't be compromised by this situation, I interrupted firmly. You're building your own foundation, which is exactly what you should be doing at this stage. My father's expression reflected something I had rarely observed directed toward me: respect untainted by comparison or qualification. Olivia's right. This is our responsibility to address, not yours. The acknowledgement represented more than agreement with my recommendation. It signaled recognition of the fundamental principle I had been asserting throughout my adult life, that each individual deserved the opportunity to establish financial independence without disproportionate family obligations. As my parents and sister departed, each carrying specific action items from our planning session, I remained briefly in the living room, absorbing the significance of this restructured family dynamic. The daughter who had been required to pay rent while her sister lived expense-free was now orchestrating the financial recovery that would determine her parents' future stability. The irony wasn't lost on me. Later that evening, as I updated my personal budget to account for the $3,000 loan I had committed to my parents' recovery plan, my phone displayed a text message from Madison. Had no idea you knew so much about financial recovery. You were amazing today. The validation from my sister, who had previously viewed my financial focus as an oddity rather than a strength, represented another shift in our family's perception. My capabilities, long minimized in favor of highlighting Madison's more readily apparent talents, were finally receiving acknowledgement without qualification. I responded simply, "Thanks. It's literally my job." Her reply arrived moments later. "Well, you're really good at it. Dad actually took notes while you were speaking. Never seen him do that before." The observation highlighted another dimension of our evolving family dynamic. My father positioned as student rather than authority, recognizing expertise in the daughter he had perpetually underestimated. The reversal contained no vindictiveness. On my part, only professional satisfaction in applying my skills effectively to a challenging situation. Over the following months, I maintained professional boundaries while guiding my parents through the initial phases of financial recovery. Weekly meetings reviewed progress, addressed emerging challenges, and refined strategies based on changing circumstances. My father, gradually recovering his physical health while adjusting to diminished professional standing, demonstrated unexpected adaptability to his reduced circumstances. The negotiated settlement with Citibank was accepted, he reported during one such meeting, referencing the strategy I had developed for addressing their largest credit card obligation. 38% reduction in principal with a structured 30-month payment plan. Excellent, I acknowledged, updating the master tracking document on my laptop. That improves monthly cash flow by approximately $240 compared to the original minimum payments. My mother, who had secured part-time employment at a local interior design firm to supplement household income, contributed her own progress report. The utility companies approved the budget billing plans. It reduces, the summer cooling costs significantly, though winter payments will be higher than before. Their engagement with the recovery process, following recommendations, implementing strategies, reporting progress, represented not just financial responsibility, but fundamental respect for my expertise. The daughter who had been perpetually expected to prove her value was now valued specifically for her proven capabilities. Madison, meanwhile, continued her parallel journey toward financial independence, applying the principles we discussed to her own circumstances with impressive discipline. By the time her nursing program concluded in December, she had accumulated sufficient savings to secure her own apartment, modest but comfortably furnished through careful budgeting and strategic purchasing. "I couldn't have done this without your guidance," she told me during the small housewarming gathering in her new space. "I'd still be living at home, depending on Mom and Dad for everything." "You did the actual work," I reminded her, genuinely, proud of her transformation from financial dependence to self-sufficiency. "I just provided some structure." She shook her head, dismissing my modesty. "You showed me what was possible. I never realized how much freedom comes from managing your own money until you helped me understand it." Her recognition of the connection between financial competence and personal autonomy reflected the core principle I had been demonstrating throughout my adult journey: that true independence required both the skills to manage resources effectively and the boundaries to protect them appropriately. By the 1-year anniversary of my father's hospitalization, the family's financial situation had stabilized into sustainable, if modest, functionality. The house had been sold and replaced with a comfortable condominium, requiring significantly lower maintenance and carrying costs. My father had transitioned from financial advising to part-time bookkeeping work that utilized his skills without the pressure of his previous role. My mother's interior design position had expanded to full-time, providing both income and professional satisfaction she had previously channeled into maintaining appearances. Most significantly, our family dynamics had fundamentally recalibrated. The preferential treatment that had defined Madison's experience and the constant proving required of me had been replaced by mutual respect for our different strengths and recognition of our equal value. Family gatherings, now hosted in my apartment, or Madison's as often as our parents' condominium, featured balanced conversation and genuine interest in each member's developments rather than disproportionate celebration of selected achievements. During one such dinner, as we celebrated my completion of CPA certification and transition to a senior position at Walter's firm, my father raised his glass in a toast that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. "To Olivia," he said, his gaze direct and free from the comparison that had characterized previous acknowledgments of my accomplishments, "whose financial wisdom saved this family from disaster and whose generous spirit offered help, despite having every reason to refuse it." The acknowledgement, public, unqualified, and explicitly recognizing both my capabilities and the injustice of our previous dynamic, represented the culmination of a journey neither revenge nor reconciliation but something more valuable: recognition of my inherent worth, independent of external validation or comparative value. Later that evening, as Madison helped me clear dishes while our parents engaged in comfortable conversation in the living room, she nudged my shoulder gently. "You know what I realized recently? When Mom and Dad made you pay rent while I lived free, they actually gave you a gift they never gave me." "What gift was that?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "The gift of knowing you can handle anything financially," she replied thoughtfully. "I was terrified when I first moved out because I'd never had to manage money independently. You already knew you could do it, had been doing it for years." Her observation highlighted the unexpected outcome of our parents' unequal treatment, that the very challenges designed to diminish me had ultimately equipped me with strengths my more privileged sister had been denied the opportunity to develop until adulthood. "So, my revenge for all those years of paying rent while you lived free," I began, contemplating the journey that had brought us to this point. Was becoming the financially capable adult who could choose to help when they needed it most, Madison finished. And then teaching me to become one too. Pretty elegant revenge if you ask me. As we rejoined our parents in the living room, I reflected on the transformation our family had undergone, not through vindictive retaliation for past injustices, but through the consistent demonstration of the values I had developed despite them. The unequal treatment that had once defined our family dynamic had ultimately produced an unexpectedly equal outcome. 4 adults making independent choices aligned with their authentic capabilities rather than prescribed roles. That, I realized, was the true revenge against inequity, not perpetuating its damage through reciprocal harm, but transcending its limitations through deliberate growth. The daughter who had once been required to pay for her place in the family had become the woman whose value required no external validation or comparative assessment. It was self-evident in the life she had built and the principles she had maintained. In helping my family recover from financial disaster, I hadn't simply settled an old score. I had demonstrated a fundamental truth that would reshape our relationships going forward. True worth is measured not by what you receive, but by what you can contribute when it matters most. 6 months into my parents' financial recovery plan, I found myself seated in Walter's office for an unexpected meeting he had requested. The September afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across his desk as he reviewed documents with uncharacteristic formality. Usually, our interactions maintained a comfortable balance of professional guidance and personal mentorship. Today, however, something felt different. "Olivia," he began, setting aside the folder he had been examining. "I've been watching your work with the Carson manufacturing account and the other clients in your portfolio. Your performance has consistently exceeded expectations." "Thank you," I replied, automatically preparing for constructive feedback to follow the positive acknowledgement. Years of conditional praise from my father had trained me to anticipate qualification after compliments. Instead, Walter smiled and continued. "I'm approaching retirement next year. The firm needs someone to take over my client relationships gradually, someone who embodies both technical excellence and personal integrity." The implication hung in the air between us, so unexpected that I briefly wondered if I had misunderstood. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm offering you a partnership track position," he confirmed, "starting as a senior accountant with scheduled advancement to junior partner within 3 years, assuming continued performance at your current standard." The opportunity represented not just professional advancement, but validation of capabilities I had developed despite, or perhaps because, of the challenges of my formative years. While my parents had consistently underestimated my potential and treated financial support as conditional on meeting their expectations, Walter had recognized and nurtured my aptitude without qualification. "This is a significant opportunity," I acknowledged, already calculating how this career advancement would impact my carefully structured financial goals. I'd need to complete my CPA requirements more quickly than planned. Walter nodded approvingly. "I anticipated that concern. The firm will cover the remaining certification costs and provide study leave as needed. We consider it an investment in our future leadership." The contrast between this support, freely offered based on demonstrated merit, and my father's transactional approach to assistance struck me forcefully. Throughout my life, I had been required to justify every request for help, to prove myself worthy of basic resources while watching Madison receive unquestioned support. Now, a professional mentor with no familial obligation was investing in my development simply because he valued my contribution. "I would be honored to accept," I said finally, my voice steadier than the emotional current running beneath it. As I left Walter's office that afternoon, the weight of this new responsibility settled alongside a growing lightness, the liberation of being valued for exactly who I was rather than measured against arbitrary standards or compared to a favored sibling. The daughter who had been required to pay rent while her sister lived expense-free was now being offered partnership in a respected accounting firm based exclusively on her own merit. That evening, as I updated my 5-year plan to incorporate this accelerated career trajectory, my phone displayed Madison's incoming call. Our weekly check-ins had become a valued routine, her journey toward financial independence paralleling my professional advancement in unexpected ways. "You'll never believe what happened," she began without preamble, excitement evident in her voice. "Westbrook Memorial offered me the clinical educator position in the cardiac unit. It's full-time with benefits and a 40% salary increase over my current role." "Madison, that's fantastic," I replied, genuinely thrilled by her achievement. "Your hard work is really paying off." "It's more than that," she continued. "The director specifically mentioned my financial responsibility initiative as a factor in their decision. Apparently, the program I developed to help patients understand and manage their cardiac care costs has received exceptional feedback." The irony wasn't lost on me. That Madison, who had been sheltered from financial reality throughout our childhood, was now being recognized professionally for helping others navigate healthcare economics. The skills she had developed through our financial counseling sessions had translated into a program that benefited vulnerable patients during their recovery. "That's incredible," I said, hearing the genuine pride in my own voice. "You've transformed a personal learning experience into something that helps others." "I couldn't have done it without your guidance," she acknowledged, her tone reflecting our evolved relationship. "Which brings me to another topic. I'd like your advice about something." She proceeded to outline her concerns about accepting the promotion while our parents' financial recovery remained precarious. "Mom mentioned they might need additional help with the condo association's special assessment. I'm wondering if I should delay my apartment search to provide financial assistance." 6 months earlier, I might have reflexively advised her to protect her independence at all costs, to avoid being drawn into the financial entanglements that had constrained my own choices for years. Now, with greater perspective on our family's evolving dynamic, I considered more nuanced counsel. "What would financial assistance mean in practical terms?" I asked, focusing on specific parameters rather than emotional reactions. "Are we talking about a defined contribution for a specific purpose or open-ended support?" "The special assessment is $3,200 for building envelope repairs," Madison explained, demonstrating the detailed financial awareness she had developed. "They've already allocated $1,800 from their emergency fund, but the remaining $1,400 is due before my promotion takes effect." "And your current savings allocation?" I inquired, mentally reviewing the budget framework we had established together. "Independence Fund just passed $12,000, she replied promptly. "Helping with the assessment would delay my apartment timeline by approximately 2 months, but wouldn't compromise my emergency reserve." Her analysis reflected the financial maturity she had cultivated, weighing obligations against resources, distinguishing between wants and needs, recognizing the difference between unsustainable support and strategic assistance. The sister who had once accepted parental favoritism without question was now making thoughtful decisions about resource allocation based on defined parameters rather than emotional patterns. "It sounds like you've already reached a conclusion," I observed, recognizing the clarity in her assessment. "What specific advice are you seeking?" Madison's soft laugh acknowledged my perception. "I guess I'm looking for confirmation that it's possible to help without falling back into old patterns, that I can provide financial assistance without becoming financially enmeshed." Her question highlighted how fundamentally our perspective had shifted, from viewing family financial interactions as either exploitation or entitlement, to recognizing the possibility of bounded support based on mutual respect and clearly defined terms. "The key is documentation and boundaries," I advised, sharing the principles that had guided my own engagement with our parents' recovery. Define exactly what you're contributing, establish clear expectations about repayment if applicable, and, most importantly, ensure this assistance doesn't compromise your own financial security. As our conversation concluded, I reflected on the parallel journeys Madison and I had traveled over the past year. Mine from resentment toward empowerment, hers from dependence toward agency. The sisters who had been positioned as financial opposites by our parents' unequal treatment were now supporting each other's growth toward balanced responsibility. The following Sunday, our family gathered at my parents' condominium for the monthly financial review session that had become our new tradition. The living room, considerably smaller than their previous home but arranged with my mother's characteristic attention to aesthetics, provided a comfortable setting for these discussions. The credit card settlement with American Express has been finalized, my father reported, referencing the documentation organized in the financial management system I had developed. 42% reduction in principal with a structured 24-month payment plan. That improves your monthly cash flow position by approximately $280, I noted, updating the master tracking spreadsheet on my laptop. How are you planning to allocate that improvement? The question represented a fundamental shift in our interaction. Pattern. Previously, financial discussions had been characterized by my father's unilateral pronouncements and my obligatory compliance. Now, I provided professional guidance while acknowledging his agency in implementation decisions. We're allocating 60% to accelerated payments on the Bank of America account and 40% to rebuilding the emergency fund depleted by the special assessment, he replied, demonstrating both the technical knowledge I had helped him develop and a newfound commitment to financial discipline. My mother, who had embraced her expanded role in their financial management with unexpected enthusiasm, contributed her own update. The interior design firm has offered me a partnership opportunity with equity participation. It would require a $5,000 investment, but projects to increase my annual income by at least 30%. An intriguing opportunity, I acknowledged, already analyzing the risk-reward profile based on the information provided. What specific understanding do you have regarding the equity structure and profit distribution? As my mother detailed the partnership proposal with impressive technical precision, I noticed Madison observing our interaction with thoughtful attention. The family dynamic had evolved dramatically from the rigid hierarchy that had characterized our childhood. My father issuing financial dictates, my mother reinforcing his authority, Madison receiving preferential treatment, and me striving to prove my worth through compliance and contribution. Now, financial discussions proceeded as collaborative problem-solving sessions, with each participant offering relevant information and receiving appropriate acknowledgement. The father who had once demanded unquestioning acceptance of his financial decisions now sought guidance from the daughter he had previously undervalued. The mother who had reinforced disparate expectations now pursued her own professional advancement. The sister who had benefited from preferential treatment now contributed to financial solutions based on merit rather than favoritism. As our meeting concluded with updated action items assigned to each family member, Madison asked for a moment to share her own news. I've accepted the clinical educator position at Westbrook Memorial, she announced, pride evident in her posture. And I'll be contributing $1,400 toward the Condo Association's special assessment. My parents' reaction revealed how substantially our family patterns had evolved. Rather than automatically accepting Madison's financial assistance as entitlement, they responded with appropriate gratitude, tempered by accountability. That's extraordinarily generous, my father acknowledged, maintaining eye contact rather than dismissing her contribution as expected. We've documented it as an interest-free loan with repayment scheduled to begin in January. The formality might have seemed unnecessary to outside observers, but within our family context, it represented profound growth. Recognition that financial interactions should be governed by explicit agreements rather than implicit expectations, regardless of which family member provided assistance. I have news as well, I said. seizing the opportunity to share my professional advancement. Walter has offered me a partnership track position at the firm, starting as senior accountant with scheduled progression to junior partner. The announcement was met with genuine congratulations untainted by comparison or qualification, my father's pride undiminished by professional envy, my mother's enthusiasm untempered by concerns about how this might affect my availability to assist them, Madison's excitement unmarred by competitive positioning. "That's extraordinary, Olivia," my father said, his expression reflecting authentic recognition of my achievement. "Walter clearly recognizes what we should have acknowledged years ago: your exceptional financial acumen and professional integrity." The acknowledgement, freely offered without expectation of reciprocal benefit, represented how fundamentally our relationship had been restructured. The father who had once viewed my financial contributions as obligation now celebrated my professional success without calculating its advantage to him. The transactional pattern that had defined our interactions had been replaced by genuine respect for individual accomplishment. Later that evening, as Madison helped me gather my materials before departing, she nodded toward our parents engaged in quiet conversation near the kitchen. "They've changed so much," she observed. "Dad, especially. I never thought I'd see him defer to anyone's financial judgment, let alone yours." "Crisis often catalyzes transformation," I replied, considering how my father's health emergency and financial collapse had necessitated the recalibration of our family dynamic. Though I suspect the changes were building before his hospitalization. Madison nodded thoughtfully. "When you moved out and established independence, that was the first real challenge to the system. Then when you refused to provide the loan without documentation, it forced a reckoning." Her observation highlighted how my boundaries, initially established as self-protection against exploitation, had ultimately benefited our entire family by disrupting dysfunctional patterns and creating space for healthier interactions. The rent I had paid while Madison lived free had trained me in financial discipline. The independence I had fought to establish had demonstrated an alternative to enmeshed dependence. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they hadn't treated us so differently?" Madison asked as we walked to our cars. "If they'd required the same financial responsibility from both of us?" The question invited resentment or regret, emotions I had certainly experienced throughout our childhood and early adulthood. Instead, I found myself considering how the very inequality that had once caused such pain had ultimately shaped both of us in unexpectedly valuable ways. I might not have developed such strong financial skills without the pressure to justify every expense, I acknowledged. And you might not appreciate financial independence as profoundly without experiencing the limitations of dependence. Madison considered this perspective. So, their unfairness accidentally prepared us both for different aspects of adulthood. You learned self-sufficiency early? I learned the value of it later. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from imperfect teachers, I agreed, recognizing how our parents' flawed approach had nonetheless equipped us with complementary strengths. The sister forced to pay rent had developed financial discipline and professional expertise. The sister permitted to live free had cultivated emotional intelligence and caregiving capabilities. Together, we possessed a more complete skill set than either would have developed in isolation. As autumn progressed into winter, my professional advancement accelerated alongside my CPA certification process. Walter introduced me to key clients as his designated successor, providing opportunities to demonstrate both technical proficiency and relationship management skills. The Carson manufacturing executives, impressed by my structured approach to their tax optimization strategy, referred additional corporate clients to the firm with specific requests for my oversight. Madison's career likewise flourished in her new role as clinical educator. Her innovative program expanded from cardiac patients to include all major service lines, generating measurable improvements in patient understanding of healthcare economics and demonstrable reductions in billing-related distress. Her apartment search concluded successfully with the lease of a comfortable one-bedroom unit in a secure building near the hospital. Modest, but perfectly aligned with her financial parameters. Our parents continued their disciplined adherence to the recovery plan, gradually rebuilding financial stability through consistent implementation of structured strategies. My father's professional licensing issues resolved through a settlement agreement requiring additional ethics training and supervised practice for 1 year, a significant reduction from the potential permanent revocation he had initially faced. My mother's interior design partnership exceeded projected returns, providing both professional satisfaction and financial contribution to their household recovery. Family gatherings evolved from obligatory exercises in maintaining appearances to genuine opportunities for connection based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical positioning. Financial discussions remained transparent but occupied appropriate proportion rather than dominating every interaction. Achievement in any form received acknowledgement without competitive comparison or conditional approval. In February, I received an unexpected invitation from Professor Harrington, my graduate school mentor who had guided my academic development with the same genuine support Walter had provided professionally. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.